Florida State and LSU. Does the loser have a much harder way to get into the college football playoffs? Alabama still trying to name their starter. How is that going to impact their season? Georgia trying to go for the three-peat. We're going to talk all about it here on Up to the Second College Football Season 3, Episode 1, and we're so excited about it. This is brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors, your college football tailgate destination and official sports good and outdoor retailer of the SEC. Stop by your local Academy store or academy.com and gear up for game day today. All right, so we're changing up the show a little bit this year. Billy Liucci is going to be joining us with Caroline Fenton. You can catch her work on SiriusXM College, and they're just going to kind of go all around the SEC. And I'm also going to catch up with a national guest each week. And this week, I start things off with Chris Doering. It is Up to the Second College Football, presented by Academy Sports and Outdoors.
Need a new grill? Academy Sports and Outdoors is the destination for your outdoor cooking needs. With our free in-store assembly and pre-assembled grills and smokers, buy online at academy.com and pick up in-store. So keep those grilling plans at Academy Sports and Outdoors.
All right, let's talk to a Florida legend, SEC Network's best out there, Chris Doering. CD, what's up, man?
David, good to be back with you, man. It's nice to finally be talking about real games. Getting a chance to watch a little SEC football on Saturday night with Vandy kicking the season off, and my alma mater here just a little bit away from starting the week one action. So I'm excited, man.
Definitely want to talk about that game, but I wanted to start off with QBs in the SEC because it's been a while since we've had these many questions. Alabama TBD, A&M names Connor Wigman. You've got Georgia naming Carson Beck a couple weeks back. Arkansas with KJ Jefferson. Just when you look at the landscape of the SEC and their quarterbacks, Will Rogers, I can keep naming them. Just what do you see? How open is it potentially?
It's an interesting mix, I think, because like half the schools you have returning starters that you feel really good about, and then half the schools we've been going through quarterback battles all offseason, some of which still haven't been decided. I think the difference is kind of what you alluded to. The highest profile teams in the conference now are changing quarterbacks and Stetson Bennett moving on and having Carson Beck take over there in Athens. And then, this quarterback competition in Tuscaloosa continuing presumably into week one. So I don't remember having this many teams at kind of the top tier of the conference being less settled at the quarterback position than what it appears to this year. But it adds some intrigue. And then on the other side, Will Rogers, the most tenured quarterback in the league. For some reason, the media picks them to go 7th in the West this year. I completely don't understand that. But it is a kind of a cool little mix that I think leads to some great storylines.
CD, that brings me to another point, too. There's a bunch of teams in the SEC that I can believe they can win 9 games. There's a bunch of teams I could see. That's those same teams I could see being 7th as well. I mean, would it shock you if Auburn won a bunch of games, if Arkansas wins or loses? Like, there's so many questions out there.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that there's so many teams kind of bunched up. I think at the top we have Georgia, and then there's a little step down, and then there's LSU and Alabama. And then after that, it seems like there's a lot of teams that are vying to beat one another up. Kind of the dynamic in the East last year. I think you saw Tennessee and South Carolina assert themselves at the cost of Kentucky and Florida backsliding a little bit last year. I think that kind of dynamic exists throughout the entire conference this year. And I had a discussion on my show with Alyssa Lang this morning. Like, I believe Texas A&M is probably the third best team in the West as things shake out this season. But I could also see them underperforming this year, and I could see Mississippi State being the third best team in the West. So a lot of parity, I think, in the league reminds me very much of the NFL. And I think that creates more excitement in all 14 SEC schools.
All right, let's keep it there with A&M. You mentioned Connor Wigman. If Wiggy is what we think here in College Station he's going to be, then is it closer to that, third team, potentially second team in the West?
I believe that they could be the kind of the dark horse in the West this year. And my opinion has changed. Your buddy, Billy Liucci, man, kind of talked me into, understanding the dynamic of all the returning talent back in the summer when he was on our show. And then as I got a chance to be around some of the players, particularly Anaya Smith in Nashville at Media Days, I felt this confidence, and I felt from him a sense of urgency, and that happens. I tore my Achilles tendon in the NFL, my first major injury that I missed the entire season from, and when you come back, you're kind of on a mission. And I feel like that entire team has taken that sense of urgency from Anais and the embarrassment of last year, and they've used it to create this mantra that they kept talking about over and over again, and that's let's finish, finish. And I think it's important for Texas A&M to get off to a fast start this year to help build that momentum, because I think a lot of times in the offseason, teams that are ascending think they have what it takes, but until you actually see it play out on the field on a Saturday, you don't really know for sure. So having a fast start, I believe they go to Miami the second week of the season. I think that'll be a game that can go a long way in helping to define what their year is going to look like.
And let's talk about Tennessee, because I like what they have, but I have my questions about Joe Milton. A lot of people do. What do you expect from him, and what do you expect from the Vols this year with Kentucky really creeping closer?
Yeah, I go back to what I said a minute ago, and that my opinion on A&M changed since seeing them in Nashville. And I think my opinion has kind of waned a little bit on on Tennessee, just as I look a little closer. We are all naive if we think Hendon Hooker, one of the best players in the history of that program, moving on and filling that void, is not going to create some sort of at least speed bump in the acclimation of this offense to having Joe Milton as the full-time trigger man. I know it was great getting a chance to watch him play against Vandy and Clemson last year at the end of the year, but I think Florida catches a real break with Tennessee coming to town the third week of the season. It's the first real hostile environment he'll have a chance to be the starting quarterback in. So I as a Gator, I am much more thankful to have Tennessee coming to town in September than I would in November, when they've had a chance to really kind of gel and acclimate to one another. But I do think Tennessee takes a little bit of a step back. I mentioned Mississippi State's my dark horse team in the West. Kentucky is that same team in the East. I honestly believe they finished second this year. I was largely disappointed with what happened last year. I thought they had the pieces to be a much better team, potentially winning 10 games. But this year, with Devin Leary coming over from NC State, Liam Cohen returning as the offensive coordinator, which should be a better offensive line and a stout defense as always, I think that they're going to be the team that maybe elevates themselves from that group of teams in the middle of the SEC East.
All right, let's talk a little bit about Florida, because Cam Rising, it's all about the injury status of him. He says he feels great. If he plays for Utah, what does that mean to that matchup? Because last year, Anthony Richardson was on a different level.
Yeah, here's the thing. You could tell me he's ready to go. You can lift him number one on the depth chart, but coming back from an injury like he suffered at the end of the season last year, not having a ton of time to go full speed in practice, even if you get him, how close to 100% is he, and how much is the chemistry able to be picked up where it left off before the injury? So I do have some questions. Also, Brant Kuithe, the tight end that lit Florida up last year, 9 catches, over 100 yards and a touchdown, probably will not play either. So again, I think Florida is the beneficiary of the schedule. It's going to be tough regardless going out to Salt Lake, but I think not having Cam Rising potentially, or not having him at 100%, not having Kuithe, it could allow Florida to maybe minimize what I think would otherwise be a roster advantage that the Utes would have.
I got you on the show, so I got to ask you, Swamp Kings. I loved it. I know some people didn't love it. What I really enjoyed about it was there's a certain DNA in winning teams. There's a culture. There's a dog in them, and I really saw that in both of those championship seasons. What did you kind of take? What was your takeaway?
Yeah, I've been on part of some really good teams, and I think when you have really good teams, there's a mix of personalities, and you do have that dog. You do have those guys that are kind of on the edge. And, I know in the trailer they talked about the 38 or 41 or 43 arrests that, that roster had. Some of those more serious than others. I would have liked to have seen more discussion of some of that. But I do think you have to have – you don't want choir boys on your team. You want to have some guys that have a little edge to them, and that Florida team during that era certainly had a number of those. It was great seeing a little more from Brandon Seiler. He became a quick star as that series was debuted. But I'll tell you, as a Florida guy, it was a great fluff piece, a great advertisement for the program. I think it's a reminder of a lot of younger players. Florida's been largely irrelevant for a decade plus, and so some of the younger kids out there don't realize what Florida's capable of. Some of the Florida players themselves don't know what Florida's capable of when you get things rolling, that atmosphere of the swamp, the support from the fans. So I think it served the program really well, and I think that it'll go a long way in terms of helping to get Florida back on track.
CD, I lied. I do want to ask this. I'm really high on Kentucky. I love Ray Davis. I love what he can do. Devin Leary could be the truth. Liam Cohen coming back. They got a great wide receiver group. Are they the team in the East that can make some noise and maybe be that second-best team?
Yeah, I do think they're the second-best team in the East for all the reasons that you mentioned. Liam Cohen, I never thought he would return to college football, let alone to Lexington, and to get him back after only a year was quite the coup for Mark Stoops. The thing I love about Coach Stoops, the second longest tenured coach in the SEC, is that he really knows his team. He knows who they want to be, even so much so they recruit a little differently, right? Instead of going down south into all the SEC footprint, he goes north into Ohio, made hay up in Big Ten area. Wants to build that team around the blue collar mentality of being able to run the football first. Goes out and gets Liam Cohen a couple years ago because he knows that offense is based around downhill rushing attack and play action pass, wanting to add a little more of the vertical threat. And they certainly can do that. You mentioned that trio of wide receivers, Varian Brown, Dane Key, Tavion Robinson. I think that may be the best collection of wide receivers that I can remember Kentucky having in a long time. So couple that with what we expect to be a better offensive line. Ray Davis, 1,000 yards rusher in this SEC last season coming over from Vandy. I think they got all the pieces. Hopefully they can put it together.
All right, that is Chris Doering of the SEC Network. Chris, thanks so much, man. Take care.
Hey, good to be with you again, David. Have a great season, man.
At Academy Sports and Outdoors, bikes for the whole family are just a click away. Buy online at academy.com with our free in-store assembly. Your next set of wheels, plus helmets, pads, and water bottles will be waiting for you at our in-store pickup counter. Get to the fun faster with our in-store pickup and free assembly at Academy Sports and Outdoors.
Welcome to the season opening edition of the Up to the Second podcast, brought to you, presented by our good friends at Academy Sports and Outdoors. I'm Billy Liucci. She's Caroline Fenton, the Aggie, the Bayou Bengal. Big season openers this week around the country. None bigger than LSU-Florida State Sunday night. I know you're going to be tuned in and watching. First of all, where are you going to be watching? Is this going to be Nashville, or are you going to the game?
It's going to be Nashville. My parents are coming in town to Nashville
Awesome.
for the Tennessee-Virginia game, so I'll be here locally. I haven't decided if it's going to be like the LSU alumni Nashville watch spot at a bar, or if maybe that this
Private.
is just the best game to watch from the safety of my own home. Watched it from home last year. Was very glad that I did. But in Nashville, just not quite sure where yet.
I think I might watch that one at home. I'd be too stressed out. First off, we'll talk for a second about what we're kind of doing here. But what I'd love to see or to hear and let everyone catch up with you, last time we talked was we were actually in here after A&M LSU, final game of the season for the Aggies. You guys had Purdue in that bowl game. But tell everyone what you're up to now, both in Nashville and in, some new exciting stuff for you on the airwaves.
Yeah. So I'm still in Nashville. I host a show on ESPN 102.5 The Game locally here in Nashville. Caroline, Willie, and D Mace, 11 to 2. We're streaming on socials, the ESPN 102.5 The Game app as well, so you can listen wherever you are. But I'm also on the SiriusXM, SEC, and college sports channels. So next week, I'll be on Wednesday and Thursday from 2 to 5 Central on SiriusXM, SEC Radio.
Perfect. There you go. And it should be a lot to talk about based on what happens this Sunday night. So we're going to do every week, we're going to pick an SEC game of the week to really talk about and dive into. Normally, it's going to come a little later in the segment. Obviously, this week, we're going to start it off because what we're going to do every week to start off is talk about the LSU Tigers, the Texas A&M Aggies, and we'll go from there. So let's start off with the big one, LSU-Florida State. Where are you at right now mentally with this football game in terms of, do you think LSU gets their payback after what happened last season in a game that, heck, very well might have kept LSU out of the playoffs?
Yeah, I'm weirdly enough going into this game with a lot of confidence. And I don't know if that's just week one of the season, anything could happen kind of confidence, or if it's just the amount of production that this LSU team returns and the amount of seniority and experience and leadership that this team has, that it feels like to me, even if you slip up against Florida State in week one, I think the season is still really bright for LSU, depending on how the game goes. But you look at the game last year in New Orleans, LSU, Florida State. Florida State had a lot of question marks. Mike Norvell went into the season kind of on the hot seat. He hadn't really done a lot in his tenure so far at that point at Florida State. Brian Kelly coming in, brand new head coach. Jaden Daniels, first game in the SEC. He had two true freshmen on your offensive line at right and left tackle. There were just so many questions about this LSU team. And the heartbreaker of it all was the expectations for that team at that point were fairly low. There were a lot of questions, but that was such a winnable game for LSU. They just shot themselves in the foot. 2 muffed punts, 2 blocked kicks, a whole lot of dumb penalties. And it came down to the wire, and it was a 1-point loss against Florida State. So I think that the biggest difference here is you expect those penalties to be cleaned up, that you don't expect those silly mistakes to happen because, it's week 1 of the season and weird things happen week 1 of the year. But it feels like there is so much more confidence in this team internally that it's almost palpable externally. You're being led by Jaden Daniels going into year 2. You're returning your leading receiver. You're returning your top 5 leading rushers. You're returning your top defensive player. And of course, losing Mason Smith for the first game of the season doesn't help the defensive line. But again, you were able to win 10 games without him last season.
It's really interesting because we're talking about the defending SEC West champs. I don't think, and I watched them here at Kyle Field, that game notwithstanding even, but you do include it as one of 12. I don't think LSU was that impressive last year to watch week to week. I saw the Tennessee game. Bama, they beat on the last play. A bad A&M team lost to them on the last play. I know that was Jalen Milroe, but that was in Tuscaloosa. The Aggies were, making plays offensively, which they didn't really do against anybody. Texas almost beat the Tide. But here, Tennessee did beat them. Mm-hmm. But here's my thing with that. Florida State didn't just blow me away either. I watched them struggle in the bowl game against a bad Oklahoma team. And I feel like with Florida State and LSU, people were getting one step ahead of kind of what they really were. And credit LSU for winning the West because something that A&M hasn't been able to do in 11 years. And here's where I'm going with that, Caroline. They didn't impress me that much compared to what their record was. They were 9-3. They were a 9-3 team. I guess they look like a 9-3 team. We talked about them like they were, maybe it was because they won the West. I felt like they were all the talk of college football at 9-3. Florida State was similar. If you really broke down, like, what did they really do last year? But there's so much talent on both of those teams. And I love what they both have at the quarterback position. Yeah. You've got a elite playmaking receivers on both sides. You mentioned for the season, they're without Mason Smith, but they have an elite game-changing defensive lineman. So does Florida State. I want to talk about him in a second. But here's what I'm doing. When we talk about A&M and you talk about the jump they should make from last year to this year, you mentioned it. That experience coming back against LSU, I didn't think they were great last year, but I thought they were good. And if they make an across-the-board jump, this year they could be great. And that's why I think they're justified in being picked atop the SEC West to start the season. I've got to see Daniels stay healthy, and I know much has been made. He's added some weight, but stay healthy and do it week after week after week. I'm worried about their secondary, and I think both of those things will be a real test this weekend. And if Daniels can go off, and if that secondary can hold up against Travis and the dang receiver Johnny Wilson just jumps out at you. The dude makes plays everywhere at 6'7". And then they were able to go out to Michigan State and get Keon Coleman, who's a guy that I think A&M really tried to make a run at. So if Daniels has a big game and that secondary holds up for LSU, I'm all of a sudden going, they're a threat to Georgia by season's end. That's where I'm at. That's where this game is to me. I am not quite there yet, but I think that you make a very fair point. I'm saying if those things happen, not just if they beat Florida State. You know what? Now that you mention it, maybe they could make a run for Georgia. Now I'm all of a sudden going to make my
if Daniels has a big game campaign.
Yeah. Like if they win 24-21 and it's just kind of different. If they hold up against that Florida State passing game with that secondary that's a question mark that should get better as the year goes on and Daniels goes off, then I'm going, okay, they probably are better than on paper than every team they're going to play, save maybe talent-wise Bama and A&M can stand up to them, and that's probably it on their schedule.
And I think that you stand where I think I do, and maybe a lot of, maybe not LSU fans, but just college football fans stand cautiously optimistic with LSU, is they're going to be a good team, but just how good can they be? And the difference between solid team making a run for the West versus team that can compete in the college football playoff, that difference is Jaden Daniels.
Yeah.
But I'm with you that I think Florida State and LSU both could be viewed as teams that are overhyped in the offseason. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. One, they were two teams that overachieved in 2022. Two, they're two teams that return a whole lot of production. I think Florida State returns more production than any other team in college football. And I think there's something to say about that, of having retention and having continuity year over year, especially at some of the most important positions: quarterback, pass rush, head coach, coordinators. And I think the third reason is because both Florida State and LSU are in very gettable division and conference situations. Like LSU is in a very gettable SEC West this year. Alabama I could see a path where Alabama goes 10-2 or 9-3 this season.
I do too.
And I don't want to discount Nick Saban, but you lose the best quarterback in college football, in my opinion, last year. One of the best, if not the best, defensive players in college football last year, and he still went 10-2. Well, now you have a lot more questions, both on the field and with your play callers, replacing two new coordinators. Yeah. So the West is gettable, and the ACC is fairly gettable.
Oh, I
don't know if UNC's defense can carry them as far as maybe an ACC championship. Clemson, they are very much so beatable.
Yeah.
So I think that the ACC and the SEC West both are very gettable, where LSU and Florida State could win their divisions. I don't think that LSU is going to win the SEC. I think that's Georgia's thing to lose. But too. Florida State could absolutely win the ACC. So I think that's the difference. It's not just the talent level and the experience level. It's also the competition level.
I think the biggest winner Sunday, who has the most to gain because of what you just said, because of who they play on the schedule. And Florida State's got a couple tough games in there for sure. Obviously, this being one of them. But if Florida State wins Sunday night, I will be including them amongst my 4 picks to reach the college football playoff after week 1, regardless of what else I see. I think they will get there if they beat LSU. If LSU wins, as you know, it's still a very treacherous path because they would have to either lose one game and probably beat Georgia to win the SEC to get in, or if they lose to Georgia and that's their second loss. We've seen how that has gone in the past. It's a tough get. It's doable. But I think if Florida State wins that game, they've got a much clearer path. And a win by them, like LSU losing that game, they can recover. Now, you might have to beat Georgia to get back in there, but they can recover and win an SEC title. I don't think Florida State losing that game, they'd have to run the table and win the SEC or ACC to get in at that point. News out of College Station yesterday, or a couple days ago, in Connor Wigman being named the starting quarterback. Again, I go back to the last time he took the field. We watched that game, and we saw it was the Devon Achane show, but also Connor Wigman outplayed Jaden Daniels that day, and that was the last time we saw him. So it was very interesting that he was competing for a starting job this summer, but you understood why, because few people are as familiar with Max Johnson as you are. You've watched a lot more of him to date than Aggie fans have. A&M fans saw him for 2 games. He beat Miami, he beat Arkansas, broke his hand against Mississippi State, season over. And I think because of that, because he lost his job to injury, and because of all that experience, I think Jimbo and Bobby Petrino said, this is an open competition. We want to see how Connor responds when pushed. We want to see who's actually, performs better in practice in this offense. It's a new season, a new offense. And it was a nice fall camp battle, but the expected happened, and that was Weigman being named. What were your thoughts as someone that covers the entire conference when you saw that announcement?
When I saw the announcement, I was not surprised.
Mm-hmm.
It was more so when the announcement was going to come that Connor Weigman was named the starting quarterback versus if he was going to be named the starting quarterback. And that's no disrespect at all to Max Johnson. I love Max Johnson. When he decided to transfer away from LSU, it was, in my opinion, for me, no hard feelings whatsoever. I thought, thank you for everything that you did. Got thrown into the fire when Miles Brennan got injured in the 2020 season, and he was left to make the best of what was not a very good team.
Yeah.
There wasn't a whole lot of talent on those teams, and it wasn't a very well-run team. So for a young quarterback to come in, and he has 14 starts under his belt at LSU, I mean, that was something that I think that can either make or break somebody, and I think it just made Max Johnson better. So I appreciated first that Jimbo Fisher and the whole coaching staff at least created an illusion of a true quarterback competition, because I think that Max Johnson deserved that.
Yeah.
And I look at it now, I think between our two teams,
that's what
Texas
I was going to say,
and LSU, they've got the best quarterback rooms in the SEC, because both of our teams have backup quarterbacks that can be legitimate starters at pretty much any other program, I think, in all of college football.
Has a team in recent memory in a blowout loss for you guys, what you walked out of in that SEC title game in a blowout loss was complete and total, and not that he was an unknown, Nussmeier, not that he was an unknown, but for LSU fans entering that game. But for him to do what he did, just launching bombs there at the Georgia Dome throughout the second half, how much did that change kind of the outlook going into that season? I think it's very similar, even though he's the backup, it's similar to what A&M fans got right there at the end with how Connor played against Ole Miss when they almost took down Ole Miss coming off, a really bad loss at South Carolina. And then certainly what he did against it. What those two guys showed in the last, let's say, regular season games there, even though that was postseason, but, what Nuss showed and, of course, definitely what Connor showed, I think changed the outlook of both those fan bases at the position. I think the coaching staffs already knew, but for in terms of just comfort level entering an SEC season where you better have depth at quarterback and you better have real dudes at the position every Saturday, both these teams should feel really good.
But the catch-22 of that is your starter goes out. Let's say Jaden Daniels goes out, whatever game it is, throws 3 interceptions, turns the ball over. Same, hypothetical situation with Connor Weigman.
Yeah.
The catch-22 of having a really good and proven backup is that the fan base is going to start calling for the backup if things start to go awry with the starter.
No doubt.
And that's when you start to create maybe a little bit of friction in the locker room, because the locker room knows that between Max Johnson and Garrett Nussmeier, both of these backups, I mean, those are leaders in the team. Those are leaders in the locker room.
Yeah.
And when things start to go wrong, if things start to go south with either one of these quarterbacks, that's when, your coaching staff is met with a really difficult decision. Now, I know within the LSU locker room that Jaden Daniels is the starter, and everybody understands that. And I believe it's probably the same way at Texas A&M. But it's like the best problem to have is so many good and quality players, especially at the most important position in sports.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And speaking of going back to LSU, the one thing I wanted to say, the matchup that to me is going to be so fun to watch Saturday if you're a football fan and you want to see SEC West national championship caliber, like best college football has to offer. Watch Watch Blackwell and Verse when those two line up. Jared Verse is probably one of the best pass rushers in the country. Will Blackwell,
Will Campbell?
Yeah, I say Black. Is
Campbell.
Will Blackwell an old LSU O lineman? I feel like he is. In
I
fact,
feel like
he is.
might be.
He is. He's a Twitter troll, and I always have to get on A-Bear. I have to get on A-Bear, and I got to get on T-Bob and Hester sometimes. I'm like, who is this dude that just comes into my mentions like with his snark all the time? Like, he might think he's the smartest guy on the planet, Will Blackwell, with the way that's who it is.
That is so
but
funny.
Campbell,
yeah,
I said Blackwell.
He was an offensive lineman for LSU.
I knew you looked confused there when I said it, but Campbell verse. Campbell reminds me of Luke Jokel and Jake Matthews when A&M signed them. They were kind of in that Johnny Manziel O-line that came into the SEC and kind of made that transition possible for Johnny and that offense. They were so good, even as true freshmen. A&M might have a freshman tackle this year. They will certainly this Saturday in Chase Besantis, and a lot of people are going, never a good thing when you have a freshman offense. I said, usually not. Not never. Because you look at Campbell, I look at Deuce Fothery, who's the one that's not going to probably start this week because he's still recovering from injury, but he was really good as a freshman. It can be done. I think a lot more so at tackle than guard. But that matchup, you want to watch two future first-rounders go at it for 3 hours, focus on that. If you just are a fan of, SEC, battle it out in the trenches football, there you go. And that's going to be a big key to them keeping Daniels upright in that one. Who's your pick in that game? I mean, you said
Quick
LSU.
side note. Are you familiar with the LSU number 7 tradition? So, it's a tradition at LSU that the best playmaker, the best player on the team wears the number 7. Goes back to Patrick Peterson, Tyrann Mathieu, Leonard Fournette. Jamar Chase got number 7 before he decided to opt out for the 2020 season.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like some of the best players of all time at LSU have worn the number 7. Will Campbell just got number 7 as the first non-skill position player in the history of LSU. So that's just a testament just to how much of an absolute dude Will Campbell is. But you're so right. I mean, this is, I think, and I think you can say this about any matchup, but more so, specifically this game, this is going to be a game that's won and lost in the trenches.
Yeah.
Who can protect their quarterback the most and who can get to the quarterback the most? Who can eliminate penalties and stupid mistakes the most? And that's who I think I'm going to give the nod to. But you ask who my pick is. I think it's going to be a really close game because I think that this is a really evenly matched matchup. You've got two Heisman hopeful quarterbacks. I would give the nod to Florida State for their offensive line. I give the nod to LSU for their defensive front, even without Mason Smith. Like that's a huge loss.
Yeah, it is.
Mason Smith is a first-round pick. I mean, you don't lose him and feel good about it or get better.
Right.
But I go back to we won 10 games without Mason Smith, and that's no disrespect to him in the slightest. But this defensive front has so much depth and has a lot of leadership, picked up some pieces in the transfer portal. So I give the nod to LSU's defensive line, the nod to Florida State's offensive line, 2 solid run games, 2 solid receiving cores. I give a slight nudge, I think, to LSU. Like it's a 2.5 point spread per Vegas. I mean, that's tough. I think it could be a 1 or 2 point game. But I have to give the nod to LSU just because it was such a close game last season, and LSU lost that game, I think, more than Florida State won it.
Yep.
And I look at both of these teams' last seasons. LSU has more impressive wins on their schedule. Florida State had a fine season, but they didn't beat a single ranked opponent on their schedule. I think that this LSU team comes in a little bit more battle tested and with a little bit more of a sample size of what it takes to win in the trenches. So I have to give the experience nod to LSU.
I like LSU 31-27 for a lot of the reasons you just said. Now, we're not going to predict the A&M New Mexico game, but what I want to talk to you about is, to me, what I keep saying that is so important to this football team this season is going to be, can they be playing at a top 15, top 12 type level in September? My point is, as good as we think, you look at the talent A&M brings back and you look at the experience, and we talked about Wigman at quarterback and the skill position weapons. Can they be playing good quality SEC West contending football from the rip, because you've got Miami on the road in week 2. You've got Auburn coming in here, which is tricky early against Hugh Freeze when he's still got some secrets in the bag and a lot of transfers. You aren't going to quite know what they are. And then obviously that one in Dallas every year, Arlington against Arkansas. None of those teams are top 10 teams, but they're all teams that could very well that are capable. A&M went 2-1 against those 3 teams last year, and they were bad. A&M was. Can you go 3-0 in those? Because if this squad can build momentum as the year goes on, I think then we could be talking about them much like last year's LSU team, who is the surprise team to come out of the SEC. Last year it was kind of LSU and Tennessee. Can A&M be that team this year? I think they're equipped to do it. I think they have to be playing really good early in the year. When you look at that schedule, is there a couple of games that stand out as like, hey, these are the swing games, or is there a stretch of games where you go, this is going to define their season?
Well, I think that there is a very clear path to being 5-0 going into Alabama. I think you talk about Auburn. I think that Auburn could be a sneaky team this year just because I think that Hugh Freeze is that good of a coach. But I think Texas A&M gets the advantage, one, of having them at home. I mean, Jordan-Hare is not an easy place to play.
Yep.
Second reason being, you play Auburn early.
Yeah.
Before Auburn, I think we'll really get the opportunity to kind of iron out all of their wrinkles and maybe figure out who they are, what their identity is as a team. I look at like Auburn, Alabama, the Iron Bowl late in the season. I think that could be a really spooky game because I think Auburn is going to start getting on a roll. They're going to figure themselves out what their identity is offensively. So I see a clear path to being 5-0, maybe 4-1 going into that Alabama game. I think more so than Arkansas, Miami could be that swing game.
Okay.
Early in the season, on the road. I think Arkansas has the best quarterback and running back duo in the SEC, but still Arkansas's got a whole lot of question marks for me. I don't know what their secondary looks like, and I know that Texas A&M is going to want to throw the ball all around the yard. So I think the biggest swing game in those first 5 games would be Miami. The second one at Tennessee. You're looking post Alabama at Tennessee is a huge swing game for both parties involved, because I think that's going to be a massive marquee win for Jimbo Fisher and this Texas A&M team to go on the road into Neyland Stadium and take down Tennessee that I think could be close to undefeated going into that game.
So each week we're going to take a bit of a deeper dive into the SEC game of the week. This time we did it. It's clearly LSU-Florida State, but we also shoehorn that into our LSU A&M discussion. So let's talk real quickly. What is your second game? I'm going to give you have to pick one, because to me there are 2 that are really intriguing. And one of them, as we air this, is going to be tomorrow night, which is Florida at Utah. One of the better, low-key, better games of the year last year. It was just so early we didn't know what to make of it. Florida went one way, Utah went the other, but Florida, that was a game that kind of set the tone for the season there for them. But that one, or I'm over here rocking my powder blue. It's like I'm on Mac Brown's payroll.
Mac Brown's finest.
We could wear this and just go attend North Carolina, South Carolina this weekend. Those are the 2.
Take that, Longhorn fans.
Yeah, exactly. Pick one. Which one do you think it has your interest the most going into this weekend?
I think probably Florida-Utah. Just because I think that game's going to be a whole lot more interesting than people anticipate it to be.
Is it because of the quarterback situation? Or
it's because of Utah's quarterback situation. Yeah. Cam Rising, he tore his ACL in the Rose Bowl in January. He's questionable for the game on Thursday. I mean, to return from an ACL tear 8 months removed, that's early.
Yeah.
Even if Cam Rising does play, I don't expect him to be 100%.
He's such a runner, too.
Right. And I think that could be a wonderful opportunity for Florida to take advantage of a Utah team without one of its greatest strengths and get a win early on their schedule. We've been complaining and making fun of Florida all off season long. And I think that could really give this Florida team confidence early. So I think it's going to be interesting. The quarterback situation at Florida is interesting too. What does Graham Mertz look like in this offense early on?
They need that win, don't they, Caroline? When you look at that schedule, they need that win. How about Florida State, Miami, and Florida all in these massive early season games? That state's trying to make the sunshine statement is what they're trying to do, and hopefully at least an 0-2 spot, right? From where we sit. But I'm really intrigued with North Carolina, South Carolina. How about the quarterback battle between Drake Maye and Spencer Rattler, which Maye, we know what the NFL is saying about him. We know what he allegedly turned down. He's probably courted by every major program in the country that needed a quarterback. I'm talking to you, Alabama. But there should be some airwaves just absolutely lit up when those two teams meet on Saturday. And Rattler finished the season so strong. Tennessee win and Clemson. And all of a sudden, Shane Beamer and Beamer ball is all the rage over there in Columbia. I'm just wondering now, if South Carolina can't beat North Carolina, and you look at their early season schedule, I think they almost like to keep that momentum going. I almost feel like they have to win this game Saturday, because you look at what happens to all that goodwill built up, wins over Clemson and Tennessee, if Rattler and company go out and lose to North Carolina out of the ACC to start that season? It's dicey for them.
I think that there's like a mucky middle competition in the SEC East.
For sure.
I think we can all agree it's Georgia at the top, and then you can look at Vanderbilt and Florida at the bottom. In the middle, and Missouri probably, I'll throw them in the mix as well. In the middle, it's a competition, in my opinion, between Tennessee, Kentucky, and South Carolina for the second best team in the SEC East.
Yeah.
If South Carolina wants to take that spot, they're going to have to win their out-of-conference games, and it starts with North Carolina. I am really excited about watching Drake Maye, what he can do for this team, what his potential NFL career can look like. I mean, he's already being slated as the second overall pick in the 2024 NFL draft. So I think just all of the hype surrounding him makes this an exciting matchup. I just don't think that North Carolina has enough talent.
Yeah,
I really don't.
I don't either.
And I think
like
that
South Carolina.
I like South Carolina. I like the defense. North Carolina's got a new offensive coordinator. They lost their two top receivers this past season. I still think Drake Maye is going to be a force. I think he's a talented quarterback. But I lean South Carolina in this matchup. I just give him the defensive nod here.
I do too. And if they do, the hype over Rattler, Beamer, the Gamecocks is going to be deafening over beating a team. It might be similar than if A&M and Wigman go out and just, light it up on South Beach next weekend. If they go drill Miami and South Carolina has a great showing against North Carolina, it'll be interesting to see these early season things. Like, you get hyped up. Speaking of South Carolina, I remember A&M doing that when they went and beat South Carolina years ago with Kenny Hill, and you wonder what's fool's gold and what's not. I don't think there's a lot that either of these teams, the Aggies or Gamecocks, would necessarily prove by winning against these ACC teams early, but I do think they have to, if that makes sense.
So I talked to Clark Lee today, Vanderbilt head coach, and he was like, look, I don't feel good after coming away from that game against Hawaii. Yeah. Me and our whole team wish that we could have just stomped them and blown them out and felt confident and moved on to the next week, but we don't feel that way, but we're 1-0.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of how you feel early on in the season when you're still trying to work out your kinks, whenever you still are figuring out your team, who your playmakers are, especially for some of these young teams. It's survive in advance.
Yeah.
because you're going to get film no matter what, whether it's a blowout or whether it's a really close game, much closer than it should be. You're going to get film, and you can just move on with a win, and you'll be better the next week, ideally. So I think that's really the key for all of these out of conference early matchups against Power 5 programs, like Alabama taking on Middle Tennessee State. I'm like, if you get a win, that doesn't wow me. But like A&M taking on Miami, USC taking on UNC, LSU-Florida State, survive in advance, and maybe you might make a statement along the way.
And you're still carrying the banner for the SEC, right? And finally, I keep wanting to say Heisman, and maybe one of these players will end up being in New York for the Heisman. We're going to talk each week. Once the teams start playing, we're going to talk about who made the biggest move in the SEC, which team made the biggest move. But every week we'll break down. We'll talk about our three real quickly here. Our three, 2, and 1, your three favorites for SEC Player of the Year as we enter the 2023 season.
So I am not a quarterback.
I'll go 3, 2, 2, 1, 1. We'll do it like that.
Okay. Then I will start with my first one, and I promise I am not a quarterback hater. I'm just a rooter for the underdog, the non-quarterbacks out there. My first one's Quinshon Judkins. I mean, I think that this Ole Miss offense could quite literally, no pun intended, run through Quinshon Judkins as Jackson Dart.
We saw that
in Oxford.
I saw that at Kyle Field.
We saw it last year.
That dude, he's something special.
He's so good.
Hey, look, you basically push Zach Evans out, and I know Zach had a good year, but you steal that spotlight, and I'm actually going to tell you I've got Quinshon Judkins at 2 entering the season. My number 3. It'll be a bit of a sleeper pick here. I don't think I feel like not enough people are talking about him. I'm going to go, I don't know if he'll finish here, but I think he's earned enough to start here for me, is Will Rogers at Mississippi State.
Interesting.
You look at the career he's had. He's played a ton of football, and I am, obviously he's just incredibly sorely missed in the sport, and Mike Leach, and just on this earth was just such a treasure. No pun.
Absolutely.
Pun intended, I guess. There wasn't a pun intended, but he wasn't. The Pirate was a real treasure to the sport, to anyone that came across him. So I think we all are kind of going, well, that offense could go. But if it doesn't, it's because of Will Rogers. And that dude's been a warrior and a really good player in this league for multiple years now. I'm actually going to start with him at 3, and I've got Quinshon at 2. Who's your number 2?
Will Rogers is interesting because Mississippi State quarterbacks, any Mike Leach type of system quarterback is going to put up the numbers. Can you win enough games? And that's the key.
Yeah.
But my number 2 is Harold Perkins. I'll go defensively. I think Harold Perkins is a candidate to be the best defensive player in all of college football. You saw it last year at LSU, the way that he was able to impact almost every single game that he was in. This year, Brian Kelly wants him to take that next step, play a more defined role. And Brian Kelly has talked about how he has so much of a better grasp of this defense and what's expected of him. So I'm thinking, well, if Harold Perkins can do that last year, now he's going to the next level. What can he be this year? So I think
likely to have a 5-sack game this year.
It's not out of the realm of possibility. The way that he can get to the quarterback is unlike any other I've been able to see.
He reminds me a lot. Just when he goes after the quarterback, and people forget Von Miller played standing up early in his career. He played a stand-up linebacker in a 3-4, but he certainly was an outside linebacker in a 3-4. Then he was, I think he played standing up. Then he went to outside linebacker. Perkins, when he pins those ears back and gets after the quarterback, he reminds me of Vaughn, just with that twitch, that bend around the edge. It looks like he should be falling down at the angles he can get to the QB with.
He's got the size and the speed that I think is a really rare combination.
Yeah, he's the one that got away for the Aggies. There's no doubt about it. Now, with that said, I have him just outside of my list, and so I've named my number 3 and number 2. Who's number 1 on your list?
Again, I promise, not anti-quarterback.
You sound
Brock
like
Bowers.
it. You sound it. Oh, Brock Bowers. Wow.
Brock Bowers is mine. And that feels so weird for me to say about a tight end. But I mean, like Brock Bowers to me, he exists through outside of the lines of maybe his positional, barriers maybe. Like Brock Bowers isn't just a tight end. Brock Bowers is the most important and most key player in that Georgia offense outside of the starting quarterback. And so I look at who normally gets the nod for these awards. It's usually the quarterback on the best team. It's like same thing as NFL MVP, same thing as the Heisman most years. But I think that Brock Bowers is going to be the biggest difference maker offensively and most marquee player, most highlighted player in this Georgia offense this season, especially for a more inexperienced quarterback like Carson Beck. So I got to go Brock Bowers, but both with his talent and just by how dominant I think Georgia is going to be this season. You know what?
I've got a confession. I was going to go in a different direction with that, and I was not going to take a flyer. I was going to go and actually pick one of your LSU guys, and I was going to actually say Jaden Daniels and say, look, he might be the starting quarterback on a team that wins the West and a team that, if they win this game Saturday night, could go to the playoff. I don't think I've got too many questions about him, though.
Fair.
In terms, it's really more like durability, and then when you have to beat a team as a passer, can you do it? But I'm in a world where I'm going, I could see it. My pick to start the season, gosh, I want to copy you with Brock Bowers. In fact, can I make a change and have Brock Bowers 3, Judkins 2? Because I think Brock Bowers is the best football. Yeah. Brock Bowers is the best football player in the SEC.
Yes.
Maybe behind Caleb Williams in the country. Harold Perkins is maybe the best defensive player in the country. But my guy that I'm going to go with a guy, and it's crazy because I haven't been on his bandwagon a lot. But as we sit here today to start the season, I'm going to go KJ Jefferson. I'm going to go with KJ Jefferson. I'm going to bump Will Rogers to 4. I'm going to put Bowers at 3. So there's my starting off point.
Kicking you to the curb.
All right. Well, I know you've got one coming up. We'll do this again next week, and there'll be a lot to talk about. I don't know if you've looked at the schedule yet. We talked Aggies and Hurricanes. There's also a little battle that's going to be happening in Tuscaloosa that we'll be previewing as well. So why don't you take us out in SE Up to the Second over here, brought to you by Academy.
First episode of Up to the Second, always a blast. We'll be back next week. Shout out to Academy. Appreciate our presenting sponsor of the podcast. See y'all next week.